Hello, I'm Jodie from Tales of Cloth, and today I'm going to show you how I make a Rose Star block. I've made this into a quilt that I've called Evensong that you can find as a pattern or an EPP kit in my shop. I've already prepared my shapes for this quilt, but I'm going to show you how I do that in a minute. When I'm making my block, I actually like to sew each round before I choose the next round, because I find that it's easier to decide what the block needs when it's just one unit rather than bringing fabrics over and making a decision. You can pick up the block and lay it on your prints that you think might work. For today, I've just decided on these prints and we'll run with that. Okay, so they're the prints I've prepared already. I like to cut my English paper pieces from scraps of fabric, and I just lay the shape on the fabric and cut an approximate 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. To baste my shapes, I use an ordinary craft glue stick, a small one, and I center the paper on the back of the fabric, and I just put 1 or 2 strokes on the edge of the paper without getting glue on the very edge or on the fabric, and then I fold it over. I move the shape around, putting a bit of glue on and folding the fabric over until I've basted the whole shape. So to start my sewing, I'm going to get my needle and thread and just tie a little quilter's knot. I'm going to pick up one of the pieces from the crown round. I'm going to place it right sides together with the hexagon, and I'm just going to put the needle through the corner of the fabrics and whip stitch along the seam. Once I get to the end of the seam, I'm just going to stitch an extra little stitch in that corner, and then I open it up out of the way, pick up the next piece, place it right sides together, center up the seam, and keep stitching. And I'm going to keep doing that until I get back around to where I started. So I finished sewing all of my crowns to the center hexagon, and I haven't snapped my thread yet. I'm leaving that in place. And what I like to do now is take the paper out of the center hexagon to make it really easy to sew those joining seams between the crowns. So then I place these joining seams right sides together and continue stitching down the seam. And when I finish this seam, I'm going to knot the thread by stitching a couple of times into the corner and then putting the needle through the loop twice and pulling it. Now I'm going to repeat that with these 5 other joining seams. So once you finish the crown round, it's time to add these little kites. So to sew the little kites together, I lay them out flat so that I make sure I've got them facing the right direction. and then I put them right sides together like I have before. Hold them together, center up the seams, and stitch the seam together. So now that all my little kite pairs have been sewn into single units, I'm going to just pick one, place it right sides together with the center unit, and I'm going to make a priority of matching up these points here. Sometimes with the tails and the way that the fabric folds over the piece of paper, you can end up with these bits being a tiny bit off. That'll come out of in the wash at the end. Right now, I like to make sure this center seam is lined up. So I do that by just placing a little clip there. And then stitching along the seam. And I forgot to put a knot in this one, so I'm just going to do the ending knot that I do, where I put my needle through the loop. So stitch all the way along this seam and then repeat this step with the next kite pair until you've gone all the way around to the beginning. When I get to the point, I just move the clip out of the way or remove it altogether. And I'm just going to sew a couple of times on the left hand side of the seam. And then I like to turn it around because my hands are small. Move the tails out of the way and sew on the other side of the seam a couple of times, and then make my way till the end of the seam. Okay, I've sewn my yellow kites around the block, and as you can see, I've still got my thread attached because we're going to start the final round at this point here where I finished the last seam. Now, I had doubts about my teal fabric, so I've stolen these crowns from a different block to see if I like them more. If you get to this point and you don't like how the next round looks, it's easy to save them for another block and use something different. The next round we sew the kites and the crowns in the two different colours together, or attach it to the centre block in one round. So we're going to start here where we ended our seam, and we're going to go up along the kite at the crown and then sew the kite in, and then the crown, and then the kite, and so on until we get around the edge to the other side of the block. To start the final round, I'm going to grab this crown here, lay it out in the right position so that I know where it needs to go, and then fold it over like this to line up the seam that I'm going to sew next. And then I'm going to keep my thread attached and whip stitch along the seam. After I've sewn this seam, I open it back up, I get the next piece and I move it over, making sure that it's in place. Line it up, and I'm going to sew this seam here. When I'm starting a new shape, I like to stitch a couple of times in the corner to hold it all in place. Okay, now I've gotten to that corner, I'm going to open it back up again, and I'm going to fold this paper piece so that this seam here can be in line. Put a couple of stitches in the corner and then whip stitch along the seam. And then I open it out again, place this one here in place, fold it over to line up the seam that I'm going to sew next, center it, move the tails out of the way and stitch. And I'm going to keep doing that, kite then crown, then kite then crown, until I've come back to this point here, and then I'm going to sew that seam to finish off. And here's my finished block. If you'd like to make an Evensong or Rose Star quilt, head to my shop and buy the pattern and the EPP kit. Thanks for watching.